has risen from the mass of potential collections to a point where that is what you want to collect. And I think that's different from, although, it's not always different. I'm thinking a lot of these women whose children leave home, sometimes what they collect is things to give the kids when they come home. Or they collect things in anticipation of grandchildren. So it has meaning.
The scenario where the antithesis was if it was a hoarder, you wouldn't let hair go because it reminded them of a certain person or something.
Right.
So,
right.
Where's the value of that? Is one
Right.
more, cohesive than another? Is it,
Right.
becomes this kind of, I see a fine line. And bringing it back into the perspective of art, let's say, and it reminds me of something you were saying about in terms of an economic perspective. I look back at some of the first artists like Rauschenberg who just didn't have the money. He made it, he had this tire and he put it together and made this, fantastic object where other people would look at it and say, is this something you've been collecting all along, and then it becomes something,
Mm-hmm.
So the intrinsic value, becomes that aesthetic question that just kind of almost gets out of hand, it seems.
I have a question. How would you calm the anxiety of a hoarder? How would you, she was talking about trading.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend that's a hoarder, and she's, if a friend tried to help her clean up her house and she never forgave her.
Mm-hmm.
She still talks about how she never forgave her.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like very fearful and
lots of therapy and drugs.
taking drugs and everything.
I think we really have to find out what they were afraid of, or what they felt they had lost,
Mm-hmm.
and work on whatever that was. Like my grandmother lived through the Depression, and so she was living in Oklahoma during the Depression. She lived in the worst part of America for the Depression, and she hoards everything because she remembers that time so vividly of being a child and having nothing to eat and having the newspapers in her shoes and walking in the snow and just all these horrible things. And so her whole house is newspapers and magazines and butter tubs and aluminum foil folded and stacked, and you would have to somehow get to that childhood fear of not having and I don't know, affirmations or something. I don't know.
Well, it's the meat and potatoes of what the three of us do. You talk about it, you put it into words so that eventually, and I mean long range eventually, you no longer have to put it into actions. But to hear all those stories about paper in her shoes and what it was like over an extended period of time with one person, or maybe group therapy, but in the context of hearing it again and again so that it can kind of be extracted from the behaviors enough that the behavior no longer means, the words mean instead, and the relationship and the telling of it becomes more important than the doing of it. And I think of how traumatic the initial precipitant was, in part, is going to dictate how long it takes, Some people would say you just go in and you get, what are these people called, like closet organizers. They come in and start throwing this out, and that people just learn to deal with their anxiety. But none of the three of us work in that way, so I don't know that we could make a very good argument for that.
I just wanted to mention that the sort of prescribed way for helping a hoarder deal with their problem is to work in concert with both a therapist and a professional organizer. And the therapist is there to gain their trust and listen to their stories, and the professional organizer is there to help them physically change the behaviors. So the therapist helps them feel safe and like no one's going to come in and take everything that means everything to them and throw it out. And the professional organizer is there to help them make the decisions, because it's kind of like alcoholism in that you can't make somebody change. They have to want to change, and they have to reach the point where they are willing to do what it takes to change. So that's in the studies where people have been helped and really have had lasting results. That's been the formula to make it work.
I just have a curiosity about sort of shifting the scale from the individual, from a psychoanalytic to more of a city scale or even national scale or global scale. And when I look at this particular image or painting, I see a landfill. And it's very striking in its beauty. So I think there's, to use some of Gemma's language, there's this inherent contradiction that's actually, I think, operating across all scales. And that globally, when we build oil container ships and send them around the world and then send them to Bangladesh to be decommissioned, and they accumulate on the shores, that gets at, sort of, when I look at this particular image, that gets at the production of waste, and that's what I see in that image.
I think that something that's relevant to that and that you said earlier is, and somebody asked if collecting or hoarding was hereditary, and I think sometimes it's just a lack of evaluating. Like you said, you had all your mother's things in your cabinet, and only maybe one of those things or two of those things were important to you, but maybe you had 10. And had you never looked, you would keep those things, and then you would keep your own parts of yourself and maybe parts of your children, and it's just assessing this debris of people's lives, and if they have space for the debris. I had two grandpas, and one, he left the debris of his life. It was just every time somebody gave him something, he left it. The other one was very organized. He hoarded butter tubs and aluminum foil and newspapers in a very organized fashion. And he was saving out of fear and out of just in case, just a necessity. My other grandpa never evaluated his life. He just left the debris of it for whoever came after him to pick up. And so I think that as far as these places that look like landfills, although to me, there was full pickup in East Austin recently, and it sort of looks like this, but there's some beautiful things to grab out of these landscapes that are public that we can take, whereas some of these other places are private places that are somebody's, like the house made out of books or the tree fort. Those are private spaces. These are public spaces where we could take this debris away. So
I think along with what you both said, there's sort of a sense of containment and leaking or spilling over, and it's a beautiful balance that's made here. Like those two piles of things that are on the corners of the painting in the back, you can just imagine, and you have to imagine where the rest of it is. And so it goes beyond the frame. And over here, there's sort of it seems to me with the trees, that there's sort of an effort to contain, an effort to go inward, and yet there's something leaking out of, seeping out of the very thing that's containing it. And maybe there's something in that too about collecting and hoarding. Where is that line where it's containing and sort of part of the thread of your life and your relationships, and where does it kind of leak out and spill into this, uncontrollable place?
In that, I was going to say, in that one with the two on the side, which as I was coming up to it, I was like, oh, they look like two Christmas trees on the side of the paper. And then as I got closer, there is a tree, like a little Christmas tree in it. And it just made me think of all the things that we get for Christmas, whether we need them or not. We just get it and get it and get it, and where does it go and where does it spill into?
Right.
Yeah, on that subject is that, like you were talking on a global level, like maybe on a spiritual level, there's a feeling of need, and we try to fill